Welcome to starting a technology company.
Morning, afternoon, evening, wherever it is, wherever you are on Earth. Today we're going to be talking about team, and team is really like very, very practical stuff. This is like who do you start a company with? How do you make that decision? And a little bit on how you actually lead an early stage company. We'll talk more, I think, next week about some of the trials and tribulations of leading an early stage company. This is really about like who do you want to actually work with? The idea here is you've got a good sense of competitive environment, which is what we had talked about last week. But really, so far, we have focused on what you are building. This is really where we start to focus on how you build it, and particularly how you build it starts with whom you build it with. And the way to think about this is all companies are going to have a pretty standard set of functions, and we'll walk you through those. In a startup, those functions aren't like departments. They're not like, the head of marketing, the head of sales. It's like jobs that have to be done. And so, really, what we're trying to do in a startup is understand, okay, how are we allocating people so we make sure that all of these core jobs that we have to get done are getting done properly? The place that almost always starts is co-founders, which is who do you want to start a company with? It is much, much easier and much more likely to be successful if you start a company with a group of people rather than doing it on your own. Can't do it on your own, just tougher. How do we determine what makes for what we call a good founder market fit? We'll give you a definition of this a little bit later on. How do you set up your team and how do you kind of design an organization over time so that as your team grows into a larger organization, you have an approach for that? Um, Biggest thing I want you to take away this week is really to get some sense of how you think critically about who you start a company with. And the number one thing that we'll do in that is assessing founder market fit. Who makes a good fit for a market? And if you have an idea in a market, are you a good fit for it? Or do you need to go find someone to work with on that front? We'll give you a sense of how you lead and set up startup companies, and we'll also give you a sense of how startup organizations are built, so the organization structure for that. The reason this matters is it is actually very common for startups to fail because they don't have the right team setup. And that can sometimes because the team doesn't gel, but in a lot of cases, it's really much more practical than that. If the founder knows some areas of the company that they need to know, for example, the MVP and go to market side of it, but they might not know enough about the domain space itself. They might not know enough about how to run HR or how to run finance. And so ultimately, it's getting a team together that we can work with effectively to be able to cover all of these different domain areas that we have to be good at to effectively allow a startup to work. A couple terms you'll hear a lot. A co-founder for us is someone that's really in it for the long term and is truly built into building the company. So co-founder titles can often be thrown around, but if somebody wants to come in and work for a couple months and then leave, that in our mind is not a co-founder. A co-founder is someone that is responsible for a long period of time for a significant amount of the product or project, depending on how you define the company. But ultimately, they are really in it and they are doing something substantive. Founder market fit is how well the founders understand the market they're entering. And often, and another way you can think about that is, are they well suited to build a company in that market? And really, that comes down to domain expertise in the market space itself. The leadership team is the group that's responsible for getting it done. Most of the time, that's a founder plus one or two co founders. They are often going to be people that are focused on doing and implementing. They tend not to be professional managers. And you'll also hear this term like generalist or a phrase that comes up a bunch is wearing multiple hats. This is just this concept that in startups, you just are responsible for a lot of stuff. And you'll hear us talk about people that are grinders, people that are not glamorous, people that just do stuff. That's this concept of like in a startup, there's a lot of stuff that just has to get done. And it tends not to be assigned to people that are actually specialized in that because the companies just aren't that big at that point. The number one thing to start with when you think about who you want to start a company with is the co-founder a good fit for the market? So, in general, our advice is you don't want to start a company with someone just because they're smart or just because you like them. Those are great things, but really you want to start a company with someone that's going to increase your ability to deliver the vision of your company, to get done what you need to get done. And we have boiled this down to kind of like five things that we look for in co founders. So the first is that between you and your co-founders, you can cover all of the different core and critical areas of a startup. And we'll give you an overview of this later on. We'll walk you through how to assess this. But as an example, if you think about it in terms of building a product, conceiving of a product, and selling a product, right? Which is, we'll talk about the hacker, hustler, hipster sort of triad, right? You got to cover all of those things. We have to make sure that we can do all of the work. So the ability to do all of the work is when we look at all the co-founders together, we have all the different core critical areas of the startup covered, particularly of a technology startup covered. The second is ideally the co-founders have worked together before. What that means is that they are experienced and have a track record in pressured environments because a startup environment is a small, high pressure environment that goes on for years and years. And the best way we know that the team is going to work together is that they have worked together in the past in that kind of environment. Shared ambition means that you and your co founders are on the same page on what you want to build, but also the level of intensity and commitment that go into building it. And so, what you want to build is a question of strategy and making sure that you're aligned on that. But how you want to build it is a question of the level of intensity. What you don't want is one co founder that thinks this is critical and a life and death mission to build the company, and another co founder that thinks, it's okay. It's no big deal if this fails, right? That would be a imbalance in the level of intensity, and that will certainly lead to challenges over time. The fourth one is a pretty broad category that I just think of as like grinders. I'm trying to figure out a better word for that. But basically, it means they are willing to do messy, unglamorous work, and they tend to have a strong bias for action. So the people that succeed in startups are people that have a very large capacity for just doing work versus what I would say is talking about doing work. And they have to be able to sustain that execution over a long period of time. Again, the best way to know that this is the case is that they have a track record for it and you've worked with them in the past. And the final category is startup co-founders tend to be generalists. Doesn't mean they don't have expertise in specific areas. In most cases, they do have expertise in specific areas, but they tend to not be limited by that expertise. They can practically get lots of different jobs done. They have the ability to learn things on the fly, to change what they're doing. They're flexible in nature, and ultimately they can move back and forth between a bunch of different things. You will hear a framework out there called the hacker, hustler, hipster framework. It's a little bit cringy, it's a little bit cheesy, but it actually does tend to be a pretty good framework. A lot of people think about the core skills in a technology startup having sort of three labels. One is a hacker, that's a technical builder, somebody that's writing code, building the product, they do the engineering. There is a hustler. That's the person who's trying to drive the business, that's selling stuff, closing deals, owning the go to market function. And then the last one is kind of a hipster, which is the person that's thinking about the design of the product experience, the brand, the customer insight. And it's not a perfect division between those three roles, but it actually does tend to be a pretty good proxy for how those roles break out in practice. Founder market fit is this concept of how well aligned are the founders to the market. We have a pretty extensive rubric for this later on. But the key thing to understand here is founder market fit is not, I've used products in this market. I think the market's cool. I read about it on the internet. That is indicative of a very passing interest or attachment to the industry. Founder market fit is, I have worked in this industry for the last 5 years. Founder market fit is, I understand the pain that my customers experience because for 10 years of my career, it was the pain that I experienced every day. Founder market fit is, I've worked in businesses, particularly in our ideal customer profile, for over a decade. I have 10 plus years of experience working in this particular industry that we're targeting. And the reason founder market fit is useful is you just have profoundly strong customer empathy and customer understanding. And so it is just much, much easier to build a good solution for a market when you have literally lived in the shoes of your customer. And that is different than interest. Interest is, hey, I find this problem interesting. I find it compelling. Maybe you read about it. Maybe there's a personal reason you care about it. That stuff's great. And it's not to say that interest is bad, but fit is different. Fit means I've operated inside this problem. I've made business decisions in it. I understand the constraints. I understand how organizations work and how they respond to this. And really, that only comes from years of direct exposure. In our experience, the best teams have both interest and fit. They like the problem, which means they care enough to stay with it, but they also know the market well enough to make very good decisions about what they should actually go and build in that market. When we look at founder market fit, we tend to evaluate it on four different dimensions. So the first is what we think of as problem proximity. So for this person, how directly have they lived this problem? So strong founder market fit means I've personally experienced the kind of problem that our software is addressing. I've personally experienced the frustrations associated with it, so they understand the emotional landscape. I've personally experienced the trade offs and how businesses address this on a day in and day out basis. Ideal customer profile proximity is how close has this person been to our ideal customer profile? And particularly in business environments, it's how many companies like or exactly like our ideal customer profile have they worked at, right? So if we sell to enterprises or very large businesses, that is radically different than selling to small and medium businesses. And if a person on our team only has experience working in large companies, they're not going to know a lot about how small businesses make decisions. And the inverse is also true. If they only have experience working in small businesses, they're not really going to have an understanding of how large businesses make decision, which is very, very different. So how close are they to our ideal customer profile? In consumer markets, often this is being the type of consumer that you are targeting with your business as well. Do they have experience and can they demonstrate from that experience they can make good, intelligent decisions? So, this means both that the person has specific experience associated with the market we want to target and that they can demonstrate that they actually will make good decisions from it. And then the final thing we look at for founder market fit is motivation durability. Is this person likely to keep enough? Is this person interested enough to keep going when things get tough? Right. And so in this case, right, there is some knowledge there, but it's also really understanding the person's underlying motivation. Like, why do they want to do this? Is it something that they're truly interested in, independent of financial returns? And do we think ultimately that motivation is going to last? We like to evaluate this in a highly structured fashion. And so you go through and you look at the team. We're going to score individual members of the team. We'll show you how that works. And then we use that scoring to then take a step back and say, okay, how do we want to design the team so that ultimately we can cover all of these different things? So the key thing you should take away from there is what we're trying to do is build a team and no one is going to be a perfect match for all of the different things that we want. So by putting a couple people that complement each other together and that we're confident can work together, ultimately we would build that a team. So that's founder market fit. Let's now talk a little bit about how startups are put together and the various different functional roles associated with that, right? And so you have founders out there doing all of these different things early on in startups, right? You're building, you're selling, you're keeping the lights on. You have a leadership team, but really a leadership team is like a couple of people, right? Two to three people working on it together. And early on, most of the people are really doing things. You don't have department heads, you don't have an organizational structure, and the CEO kind of gets everything by default and ends up batting cleanup or addressing any things that aren't actually being done in the rest of the company. In our experience, functions of technology startups split into two buckets. There's primary functions, which are the critical functions of a technology startup. And these are the things that are really specific to technology companies. And then there's supporting functions, which are, you could think of them as hygiene factors or things that support the primary functions. These are things like HR and finance. And those functions, really, you just have to not get them wrong rather than being particularly good at them, certainly for early stage companies. Whereas the primary functions, these are the things that are going to make your business different and compelling relative to other competitors in the market space. So for primary functions, the six we have, the first is overall direction, fundraising, and being the external face of the company, right? This is the CEO role. It's where are we going? How do we get there? Are we managing our key customers well? Are we building the right stuff in the marketplace? Marketing, how does a customer understand that we exist? Early stage companies tend to be very founder led in their marketing, and the founders are really the face of the company. Sales, how do we take someone that is interested in our product and turn them into a customer? That's identifying prospects, running demos, closing those customers, negotiating contracts, managing the transactional process. Customer success, which is a slightly different way of saying support, but success tends to be more global in nature, whereas support is much more reactive. So customer success is this customer, the person that has spent money with us, being successful with our product? Are they getting the benefit from the product out that they want to have? And generally speaking, if we make a customer successful with our product, we will take the point of view that we have earned the right for a renewal. Ultimately, customer success is measured by retention. Are you keeping the customers you have? And are you expanding those customers over time? Product, what do we want to build? And development, how do we actually build it? What software do we want to build is a better way to say product. And then development, how do we actually go and build that software? As I mentioned, there are then four supporting functions, depending on how you think about it. Finance, how do we track money, particularly in an early stage company, cash? Do we understand what cash we have in the bank? Do we understand what our runway is? Do we understand what our expenses look like? Most of the time, this is done by a third party bookkeeper for early stage companies, and they provide fractional support to the CEO. It's not common to have fully staffed out finance functions. HR or people, that would be really a compliance oriented role. So that's, are we following employment laws? Are we running payroll properly? Are we providing benefits? Some early focus on culture, but really in early companies, the culture tends to be driven by the personality of the founders. So most people for HR use third party services, and that's a combination of payroll service, sometimes a basic HR consultant, and then the CEO catching some open tasks there. Recruiting, how do I find people to come and work at the company? A lot of early time of the CEO and the executive team is spent on finding the first few hires. Those come from networks that the founders have and referrals to the companies, right? And ultimately trying to get the right early team and being very thoughtful about that. And then the final category is operations. Those are the day-to-day business operations of the companies. This tends to mostly be technology infrastructure in most early stage startups. So that's stuff like your CRM, those can be the production systems that you have. This can also be some back office things, et cetera. And most of the time, this is a hot potato in early companies sitting with either the CEO or a technical co-founder. As I mentioned, though, with early stage companies, the reality is none of this is departments. And most of the time, you just kind of take this list of about 10 different functions and you just sort of assign them out to different members on the team. And then the CEO's responsibility is to clean up anything that's not assigned. In our experience, that clear assignment of the ownership is way more important than the titles. So we tend not to care if people have VP titles, head of titles, chief titles. Those are decorative in early companies. And also, big titles are an easy, low cost way to keep people motivated. But the titles are not the thing to focus on here. The thing to focus on is who owns what and who needs to make sure that that area of the business is getting the attention that it deserves. A really typical breakout for this is either a two or a three-person team. And in our experience, 2 to 3 person founding teams are about right. When you get past three, the team gets big. Decision making can take a little longer. When you just have a single co-founder, it's a risky proposition, especially if it's a first-time founder, because they might not really have all the experience points covered. But what we'll see as an example of a 3-person team would be a CEO. That's kind of a fluid player. They work on strategy, direction, fundraising is their big activity. They're trying to do marketing, they're trying to sell, they're trying to hire. They might be working a little on product, they might be working a little on delivery. But the CEO is really public facing. And then the internal facing, you have a technical founder and a product founder as an example. So the technical founder is what's our architecture? How do we build it? How do we manage contractors and people that are building it? And the product person is how do we design it? How do we get people on board into it? How do we demonstrate it, et cetera, right? And so you could have a three-person team that looks like that. You could have a two-person team that looks like, a technical founder and a go-to-market founder working together. Again, there's no correct way to do it. The thing that you have to make sure that you're covering is all the responsibilities and that you're doing it with people that are qualified to cover those responsibility. And ultimately, in my experience, you really need a co-founder when the capacity you're trying to hire is a core existential requirement. So if that capacity sits in one of these core functions, that would indicate that it is a co-founder versus maybe somebody that you just want to hire into the company. Okay, so we'll wrap up today with talking about the assignment, which is really just about designing out the team. And we'll show you two different components of that. Part one is going to be how we think about founder market fit. And then part two will be how do we actually think about team setup. And I'll show you an example of this, and then you'll have access to scripts that'll let you run this or prompts that'll let you run this. But founder market fit assessment. So what I'd recommend is start with your idea and your resume. And I'll show you an example of doing this in a company that we're building called Air Traffic Control that we've used in prior weeks. And then what we're going to have the LLMs do is assess, in this example, my resume on these four dimensions we talked about. How directly have I lived the problem that this company solves? How close am I to the ICP? Do I have specific experiences that are probably going to help me be better at this? And is it likely that my motivation will maintain? And while you'll get numbers out of this in analysis, it's really more how do you think about the results of that? So we'll do that first and we'll kind of rank it based on a score of 1 to 5, right? And I would just note that while you can be terrible, perfect founder market fit, 5 of 5 across all different things doesn't really matter. Anywhere between 3 and 4, though, is pretty good. And ultimately, again, it's really more about what you want to actually focus on. So we'll do one example of that. And then the second example we'll do is just thinking about the founding team design. And ultimately, what we want to do is put things into one of three buckets. There's a responsibility that I own, there's a responsibility my co founder owns, and then there's a responsibility I'm going to outsource. So I'm going to hand that to a contractor or a service provider. And if you do want to actually turn in anything today, you can just turn in those two results. But what we'll do is we'll actually show you what this looks like. And then we'll take a break and open it up for questions. So what I did here is I went ahead and put together, and you'll get this as part of the course, my resume. So you can actually download your resume directly from LinkedIn. If you have a LinkedIn page, it's super easy. It'll build you this sort of background of the resume. You can connect that and drop that into Chat GPT or one of these other LLMs. And then what I did is I basically gave it a summary of the business that we wanted to analyze me in a founder market fit against. So this business called Air Traffic Control we were talking about last week. And we give it some basic instructions, but essentially what we say is, hey, go through, assess this resume, analyzing their founder market fit along these different dimensions. And here's a basic rubric for how we should actually give the score. And then here's how I want you to report it back. So what it came back with is it looked at this company called Air Traffic Control, and it says, okay, Air Traffic Control is a B2B marketing software product for ABM teams, right? It uses CRM data plus engagement and web behavior to build contact interest profiles. It's taken a snapshot of my background, so it gives it a little bit of an overview of, okay, who is this person? And then it gives a basic assessment. So the first assessment it says is, okay, problem proximity is not actually very good, right? We're about a 2 of 5. Tim, in this case, at 1 to 100, has done some early stage go to market marketing. I've done some work with CMOs, but the exposure is really adjacent. It's not direct to the ATC problem. And so while he has done some work in marketing, it doesn't show experience running ABM programs. It doesn't show that I've owned content personalization and so on and so forth. And so, as an example, that would be a concern. Now, I can tell you this analysis is 100% correct. I do not have a lot of experience in this particular domain problem. And so, if we want to start a company in this space, I would want someone with better proximity to the problem to be on the team. Ditto for ICP proximity, where I have not worked in the ICP, although I have a little more exposure to early stage companies. I don't have experience for this, and it's unclear whether or not my motivation would be durable. So my overall score is a 2.5 out of 5, which is to say I don't have great founder market fit. And it really looks that, hey, I'm a general business builder, but I don't necessarily have the experience in this exact go to market space. And so I should probably go find a co founder. And the missing piece would be a co founder that has domain experience in B2B marketing, ideally someone who has directly owned the ABM, lifecycle marketing, marketing ops, so on and so forth, and looking for somebody that's right, a former VP of marketing, head of demand gen, et cetera. And I can tell you, this is our exact strategy with this business. When we looked at this business, we said, hey, it's a cool idea, some good software that we could build here. We got a lot of experience in the software, but we do not know this particular business space. So for this company to be successful, we need to go find someone that's really deep into B2B marketing that really understands that wants to run with it. And so that is our strategy, is to find that person and help them use that to refine it. So that would be the founder market fit assessment. Again, just looking at like, hey, here's my resume. Here's the business we're thinking about. What's the fit? And ultimately helping you understand, do I need to find somebody else that comes onto my team and works with me or not? And understanding the domain assessment there. Founder market fit is a critical thing investors look at. So the same process that is happening here is the exact same process your investors will go through. And so getting ahead of that and ensuring that you have good answers will certainly help the case for you to get investment in your company. Okay, now we're going to look at it from a functional perspective. So the first is, do I have good fit with this market? The second is, of these responsibility areas, and we mentioned there are sort of 10 responsibility areas, 6 primary ones, 4 secondary ones. What's my strategy and what areas do I have a lot of experience in? Do I not have a lot of experience in? So here we did the same thing. We took my resume. We now said, hey, go do an assessment based on the various different areas and give me an overview of what are my relevant strengths? Where do I potentially have gaps? And so if it goes through the areas, you'll see as a CEO, I have 5 of 5 experience, which makes sense because I spent 25 years as a CEO of various different technology ventures, and I have a very good fit for that stage. I don't have a lot of experience with directly running marketing, which is highly consistent with why we're looking for a founder. So having a co-founder that could run the marketing side of this business would make a lot of sense. That's very consistent with the founder market fit here. I have more experience running sales, so I could potentially stretch to do that job, but it's not my area of expertise. I don't have experience running customer success, but I have a ton of experience running product and development. And I'm probably good enough at finance, maybe people, maybe recruiting to pull them off in operations. And so if you were to look at that, I would say, hey, I, as the CEO, probably should run Office of CEO, product and development, finance, and then maybe recruiting and operations. If I found a good co-founder that was GTM in focus and could effectively run marketing and sales, that would be great. That person could probably run customer success as well, but that one we might want to think a little bit more about. And then, you know what? You should probably not have either of the people actually running the HR function. We should probably just outsource that entirely. And I can tell you that analysis is also highly consistent with the strategy we chose for this company, which is to say we want to find a market-facing person. They will be marketing focused first, but they also have the ability to run a basic sales process. And then we'll have them manage customer success in the short term. And in the long term, what we'll do is we'll actually go in and hire someone to run customer success, or we'll specialize that out. We will not focus on having anybody run HR. We'll actually outsource all of that as well. So that's it for today. Again, all of the prompts that you have for all of that are up there. And most of the prompts that you can use, we just recommend using your downloaded resume from LinkedIn. It's relatively simple to do that. Just search, how do I get my resume from LinkedIn? You'll get instructions for it. Any questions?
Yeah, Tim,
All
I got a
right.
question for you.
Go.
Um, let's see. The first person that you talked about bringing on because of the holes you had, do they need to have it was a salesman. Does that individual have to it would be better if they have experience in your business that you're starting, but that wasn't something that you said, or I missed it.
Yeah, so two different dimensions, but yes, in you're looking for founder market fit. You want to have when you look at that, that's looking at does the person have experience in the business, and
Yeah.
then for sort of the team coverage, that is independent of that. But the ideal person that if you kind of look at both of those, the ideal person I would want to hire would be in this business, someone that has experience running marketing. At smaller or mid-sized technology companies.
Okay.
And the reason for that is I would get the founder market fit side of it. That would be a good match for the end target
Yeah.
market. And I would get the operational side of it. Now, those could be independent, but really
Okay.
what you're looking for is somebody that, like, you kind of want the perfect fit for one of these
Yes.
early co-founder spaces. You want someone that has experience in the market and can do the operational stuff.
Yeah.
Um, because so much is put on the shoulders of these early employees.
Sure. And then my second question is, I know you've been pushing a lot of things off onto AI. What were the adjustments? Like, how does this compare to what you might have done? I mean, it seems like it's in line with what one might have done 3 years ago, right?
Um, it tends to be that you still have to have knowledge of all those domain areas in the
Mm-hmm.
company. The
Yeah.
reason for that is somebody has to still babysit the AI. The
Yeah.
difference
Yeah.
is the depth of knowledge might not need to be as much. And a 2 or 3 person team can go much, much further. So it's not that you don't have people that still have knowledge of those areas, it's that those teams tend to be much more productive. So a 2 person founding team could actually take a company all the way through to launch, get it launched, have it generating revenue in this day and age because they're just so much more productive in
Yeah.
that. And so
What
it's more that is the direction we would take the bet.
now? So when you talk about skills, would that be a skill that you would want them to be familiar with, or is that something that you would fill in the gaps when it became necessary?
Uh, in general, you would want in this day and age probably someone that has demonstrated experience, working productively with AI. Um, that gets into a slightly more operational question, but yeah, I would probably look for that. Said differently, like if I were to find a marketing person in the example I provided, I would want that marketing person to be able to demonstrate efficacy in how people market today, which
Yep.
includes a lot of AI. In the
Sure.
same vein, if you were looking for a technical co-founder, we don't want a technical co-founder that is manually writing code. We want a technical co-founder that has experience,
Orchestrating.
directing a
Yep.
swarm of agents.
Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you, Jim. Today was great.
Yeah.
Last week was good too. I didn't touch base with you, but it was awesome.
Awesome. I have a question, Tim. I heard you mention as you're hiring, most of the company culture comes from mostly the personality of the founders. So considering that, is it better to hire for culture or for skill? Considering you'll be spending most of the time with that person that you're hiring. So is it better to hire for culture or for skill?
Yeah. So My general point of view is you would first hire for skills, and then instead of I would say culture, I would say hire for compatibility, which means that it's somebody that you want to work with. And in my experience, culture will naturally come out of that. I have a somewhat jaded view on culture, which is you will hear a lot about culture in business books. But in my experience, startups are not spending much time thinking about culture because they are
Mm.
operating at a much more fundamental level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I really mostly find that two people talk a lot about culture. The one type of people that talk a lot about culture are consultants that consult about culture. And then, and in that category would also be people that write books on culture, et cetera. So it's like the people that talk a lot about culture are the people that are focused on culture and how it changes. And then the second is really senior managers at large companies. And the difference there is really senior managers at large companies don't directly impact a lot of the things. And so when they talk about culture, they're talking about a lot of the disperse abstract control mechanisms that are in place. So again, in my experience, you don't really think a lot about culture at startups. You really only have the luxury of thinking about that when you start to get to be like 100 or a 200 person company. A lot of people will then say, well, once you're a 100 or 200 person company, your culture is set. And that is also kind of true, but it's still very changeable and shapeable at that point. Um, but again, the vast majority of my experience is that at small companies, people act like the way the founders act. And the way the founders act tells them what's permittable, what's not permittable, what level of intensity they expect, and people just naturally act that way. And so, sure, you can hire particularly like an asshole, and that can ruin the culture. And the founder might not have the experience to get rid of those people. So you can kind of poison it in some cases. But in most cases, again, they really just act like the founders. And in the companies where you've heard about bad culture, it tends to be because the founders tolerate bad culture and the founders themselves are assholes. And there are a lot of examples of that, but there are far, far more examples of the founders being good, decent, hardworking people. And so they create good, decent, hardworking culture. And some are more aggressive and some are less aggressive, but most of the companies do end up looking like the founders. So I would worry a lot more about your personal habits and your personal work ethic, and that will basically translate into how the company runs.
All right, thank you. So we have one more question from Emmanuel that's in the chat, and he's asking, can I substitute getting a co-founder for, let's say, C-level hires, that's CTO or COO, who then handle building the team with a goal in view?
You can, it's just risky. And so the difference between a co-founder and a C-level hire is a co-founder is really the person that is deeply committed to the future of the company with you. A hire is someone that can quit and leave. That's not to say that co-founders don't leave, but the way I would encourage you to think about a co-founder is like the co-founder is in it with you for the long haul, and a hire might bail out if the going gets tough. So that's really the difference that you're assessing there is if this is a core and critical part of the organization, do I want someone that is in it with me through thick and thin, is a thought partner for me, will know this problem as well as I will know it? Or is it someone I can hire? The only other thing on the C-level hires that gets tricky is these are technology companies. And I have had the experience that people tend to underestimate the need of a really good technical strategy to make these companies work well. And that only comes from a technical co-founder being in the mix. So an example of that would be, somebody could say, hey, I got a really good idea for technology. I want to go hire a company to build that technology for me and release it to market. In my experience, is very, very difficult to get that to work on a long-term basis because, I mean, fundamentally, technology companies require a good technical strategy to work, to be scalable, et cetera. And so unless somebody is really, really in it and has the experience, it can be tough to work. That said, that strategy is better than not doing anything at all. So it does vary, but I would use the question of like, it's not could you hire that person, it's like do you want that, or do you really want someone that is a strong thought partner to you and in the weeds with you. And there are different dimensions of that. So as an example, like for 1 to 100, we end up being a technical co-founder for a lot of businesses. And so people will have ideas, they'll be able to execute on the go-to-market side, they're not going to be able to execute on the technical side. So like we will partner with them to build it. We will own the company with them. We will be in it. And that model can work quite well. Certainly has worked for us. So it's more complicated than just a yes or no question.
Welcome to starting a technology company.